All right, let's dive into a battle that totally redrew the map of Eastern Europe. And yet, it's a story that most of us, well, we've probably never even heard of it. We're talking about the fight that landed the first real punch on the legendary Golden Horde. And in doing so, it changed, well, pretty much everything. So let me just start with this question. For more than 100 years, the Mongol Golden Horde was the power in the lands of the Rus. They seemed absolutely unbeatable, right? Their reputation was terrifying. But who was the first to actually challenge them, face to face in a real battle and win? Now, if your first thought is one of those famous Russian princes, maybe from Moscow, who we all know rise to power later on, that's a really good guess. But it's not the right one. Nope, the credit actually goes to a completely unexpected force, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. At this point in time, they were this rising powerhouse, a society of incredible warriors, and get this, they were the last openly pagan state in all of Europe. Wild, right? And that brings us right to the heart of this whole mystery. The battle is known as the Battle of Blue Waters, or Syniukha River. And this victory was so huge, it sent shockwaves all across the region. And yet today, it's barely a footnote. And look, if you need proof of how big a deal this was at the time, just listen to this. The Teutonic Knights, these guys were Lithuania's mortal enemies. They had zero reason to give them any credit. Even they called Moscow's famous victory at Kulikovo the Second Battle of Blue Waters. That tells you everything. In their eyes, Moscow's big win was just an echo of what the Lithuanians had already pulled off almost 20 years earlier. So that's the big question we're going to tackle today. If this victory was so decisive, so legendary in its own time, how on earth did it get so completely forgotten? Let's piece this puzzle together. Okay, first things first, let's meet the two sides. On one side, we have this rising, incredibly tough pagan empire. And on the other, a once invincible Mongol horde that's literally starting to fall apart from the inside. By the 1360s, these two powers couldn't be more different. Lithuania was on a serious upswing. They were forged in constant war against crusading knights, they had strong leadership, and they were just tough. The Golden Horde, on the other hand, was in a total nosedive. They were right in the middle of a chaotic period called the Great Troubles, basically a brutal civil war that had them completely paralyzed. And listen, don't mistake pagan for primitive or anything like that. No, the Lithuanians were a very sophisticated military power. Their homeland full of these dense forests and swamps was like a natural fortress, and their whole culture of raiding had sharpened them into some of the most feared warriors around. They were smart, too, adopting Western military gear while perfecting their own unique way of fighting. And who were they up against? The Golden Horde. We're talking descendants of Genghis Khan's incredible empire. For over 120 years, they were the undisputed bosses of the Rus principalities, collecting tribute, calling the shots. But by the 1360s, that whole legacy of absolute power was being torn to shreds from within. So what happened? Well, the chaos really kicked off in 1359 when Khan Bakurdi Beg was assassinated. He was the last in the direct line of Batu Khan, the original conqueror. His death just shattered the chain of succession and started 2 decades of absolute mayhem. All of a sudden, every warlord with an army was fighting for the throne. The whole empire started to splinter. It was a power vacuum of, epic proportions. And you know what they say about power vacuums? There's always someone waiting to jump in and fill it. And this brings us to one of medieval Europe's most underrated and brilliant leaders. This is Grand Duke Algirdus. He actually co-ruled Lithuania with his brother Kęstutis, which was this amazing partnership. It let Kęstutis handle the Teutonic Knights out west, while Algirdus could focus all his energy on expanding east and south. And Algirdus was a master strategist. He saw the Horde's civil war for exactly what it was, a golden opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. So while all the different Mongol hands were busy fighting each other for control of the capital, Algirdus just went to work. He started systematically picking off these Rus territories that were supposed to be under Horde control, and there was barely any resistance. One of the most powerful Mongol warlords, a guy named Mamai, was completely tied up trying to take the capital himself. So with these lands secured, Algirdus set his sights on the grand prize, the ancient symbolic city of Kiev. Now, trying to take Kiev, that was a direct challenge to the Mongols. You just couldn't do that and expect them not to respond. So even in their chaotic state, the local Tatar leaders in the south pulled their forces together to stop the Lithuanian advance, and that set the stage for the Battle of Blue Waters in the fall of 1362. The armies themselves were pretty different, and that's key. Algirdus had a mixed force of Lithuanian heavy cavalry and Ruthenian infantry, and he probably had more men. The Horde's army, led by 3 local commanders, was almost all light horse archers, which was their classic unit. But here's the crucial part. Their heavy cavalry, the real knockout punch, was off fighting with Mamai in the Civil War. They didn't have their shock troops.
Algirdas knew exactly what he was facing. The classic Mongol tactic was always the same. Ride around, shoot arrows, fake a retreat, and then surround and destroy your enemy. So he countered it perfectly. First, he set up his troops in a semicircle, making it impossible for the Tatars to get around his flanks. Second, his infantry locked shields and just absorbed that initial storm of arrows. Then, when the moment was right, he unleashed his heavy cavalry from the sides. The Tatars, who were masters of hit and run, were not ready for a head-on brawl. They got smashed. Trapped with nowhere to go, their army just shattered, and the whole thing turned into a complete rout.
The result was a total crushing victory for Lithuania. The 3 Tatar commanders were beaten, their army was effectively destroyed. It was the first time in Europe that a field army had stood up to the Golden Horde, met them head-on, and just completely broke them. But the victory at Blue Waters was so much more than just a military win. It was like a geopolitical earthquake that completely changed the balance of power in all of Eastern Europe. The effects were huge, and they happened fast. Algirdas took Kiev and put his own son in charge. He also grabbed the rich lands of Podolia, which stretched Lithuanian territory all the way down to the Black Sea coast. And just like that, the tribute money that used to flow from these lands to the Horde, it stopped, for good. And maybe most importantly, by taking over all this Rus territory, Lithuania now shared a massive border with another rising star, the Grand Duchy of Moscow. The stage was set for a rivalry that would last for centuries. So, how did the pagan Lithuanians manage to rule all their new Orthodox Christian subjects? Well, instead of forcing their religion on them, they had this incredibly smart, pragmatic policy, which is summed up perfectly in this quote. This was basically medieval soft power. By letting the Orthodox folks keep their religion, their laws, even their local nobles, Lithuania made their rule not just tolerable, but in many ways better than being under the Tatars. This smart move started this long process of pulling the lands of what we now call Ukraine and Belarus culturally westward, towards Europe, and away from the influence of Moscow. It really helped set the stage for the distinct national identities we see today. Which, of course, brings us back to our big mystery. I mean, with consequences this huge, consequences that literally created fault lines that still exist today, how did a battle this important just fade into obscurity? Well, it wasn't just one thing, it was kind of a perfect storm of factors. First off, the Lithuanians themselves, they were warriors, not chroniclers. They just didn't write a lot down. Second, historians from Moscow really hyped up their own victory at Kulikovo, and that pretty much overshadowed Lithuania's earlier win. Third, later on, Lithuania united with Poland and became Catholic. This alienated a lot of their Orthodox subjects, who then had no reason to celebrate the great victory of their old pagan rulers. And finally, because there aren't many detailed sources, modern historians have debated the battle's exact size and scope, which just adds to the confusion. So in the end, the story of Blue Waters is this incredible reminder that history isn't just a simple list of things that happened. It's really about who gets to tell the story. It's a narrative that gets shaped by winners, by rivals, by shifting politics and religion over hundreds of years. And sometimes, the most important stories are the ones we really have to dig for.